The apartment was still when the police arrived, still in the way of rooms that have recently held breath. Outside, the city hummed with the indifference of neon and rain, but inside, time had frozen around the things he left behind: a half-finished cup of green tea, a notebook open to a blank page, and the faint scent of cologne caught in the curtains. Officers moved quietly, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. On the report forms they later filled out, was described in the neutral language of procedure: compact studio, southeast exposure, evidence collected, no sign of forced entry. What they didn't record, what slipped through the bureaucratic comm, was the sense that the room itself was listening. When they opened the wardrobe to catalog clothing, one of them noticed a subtle misalignment in the floorboard beneath. A small square of wood lifted with a soft scrape, revealing a hidden compartment the size of a shoebox. Inside lay a worn leather diary. The object felt almost alive, its spine bent by repetition, its pages swollen by moisture and fingerprints. Sealed it into an evidence bag, and in that moment the apartment ceased to be a place of rest and became a riddle. The following day, the headlines were predictable: another tragedy, another fallen star. Official statements called it an accident, a private matter, a loss beyond words. Yet among the fans lighting candles on their screens, a quieter current began to move. Something's missing, they wrote. Something's wrong. That suspicion, faint at first, would later bloom into obsession. I came to the story 3 days later, sent by a magazine that still believed in slow investigation. The editor handed me a single photograph, the diary under fluorescent light, and said, "Find out what they're hiding." I took a train to the capital, checked into a cheap business hotel, and walked to the address the police report had listed. Building's lobby smelled of disinfectant and cold marble. Outside the sealed door of apartment 1703, an old woman waited, her hands wrapped around a keychain that no longer opened anything. She looked at me and said, "Out introduction. They found his diary under the wardrobe. He built that compartment himself. He used to say every secret deserves a shelter." Her name was Mrs. Yu, his mother. In her trembling fingers she held a photocopy of the first page, which she had been allowed to keep. The handwriting was slanted, urgent, almost breathless. "If this book is ever found, please read it as a map, not a confession," she whispered. He wrote it for someone who would listen. No one did. We spoke in the small hours, in a room lit only by the orange pulse of the streetlights. She told me of the weeks before his death, the way he had called every night but said less each time. The long silences filled with the hum of traffic, the fear that crept into his voice when he thought someone else was on the line. He said people followed him, she murmured. I told him he was tired. Now I think I was wrong. The police had already taken the diary, but fragments had leaked. A junior officer, easy with what he'd seen, described pages crowded with paranoia and poetry, lines about voices behind the walls. A show that never ends. A circle with no exit. The last entry, written in red ink, ended abruptly. "Mom, if anything happens, it wasn't me." Sentence lodged in my head like shrapnel. The next day I began retracing his final movements. Surveillance footage from his building showed nothing unusual, just a steady rhythm of elevators and passing residents. Yet the night before his death, a dark sedan appeared in the footage, idling without headlights. Its plates were blurred, as if the city itself had chosen to forget. I asked the building manager about it. He shook his head. "Don't get involved," he said. "People like that don't park, they wait." For a week I read and reread the copied fragments. The tone shifted between exhaustion and coded despair. They told me to smile when I wanted to scream. I signed something I didn't understand. The circle watches even when the cameras don't. At first I assumed the circle was metaphorical, a poetic shorthand for pressure. But one evening, as I organized notes in my hotel room, an anonymous email arrived. The subject line, Project Phoenix, confidential. Attached were 6 photographs, dim banquet halls, glasses raised mid-toast, and faces half caught by flash. Corner of one frame sat Menglong, his expression carved between politeness and fear. Scrawled across the back of the print in ink was a single sentence: "The circle exists." The photograph's metadata traced back to a phone registered to a former production assistant from one of his early series. Her name had vanished from public databases, her social accounts deleted. I found her last known address at the city's edge. studio with posters fading on the walls. Inside, dust coated everything except a single disc drawer, recently opened. A note lay within. If they ask, tell them I went home. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the dread was not. Through small favors and smaller bribes. A junior accountant once employed by his agency. She met me in a noodle shop. Eyes darting toward the door. Project Phoenix. Whispered, wasn't a film. It was an exchange. They traded people, contracts, image rights, silence. You didn't quit, you were reassigned. Those who resisted, she didn't finish. When I pressed, she said only, check the insurance policies. Later that night, her number disconnected. The deeper I went, the more the city's glitter turned to smoke. Executives declined interviews, citing respect for privacy. Publicists smiled too quickly. Yet patterns emerged, identical clauses in multiple contracts forbidding unsupervised interviews. Non-disclosure terms extending beyond death. Memo instructed staff to maintain emotional narrative control after incidents. The same memo referred to the circle as an informal consensus among stakeholders. The word consensus sounded benign, the reality was anything but. Then came the audio file, sent through an encrypted channel I hadn't shared. A man's voice. Trembling, they said the audience doesn't need truth, only continuity. Background noise suggested a banquet hall, faint laughter punctuated by the clink of cutlery. When analyzed, reverb pattern matched a ballroom of the Royal Emerald Hotel. Menglong had attended a renewal event 2 months before his death. The timeline aligned too perfectly to ignore. Fronted one of the names listed in the leaked documents. Producer famous for his discretion. We met in a coffee shop where the walls were mirrored and the music loud enough to blur words. He wore sunglasses despite the gloom. The circle isn't a secret society, he said. It's just how things work. Money must flow. It must stay clean. When someone stops playing their role, the audience loses faith, and faith is revenue. When I asked about you Menglong, he stirred his drink and said he thought he could quit the show. After that interview, my phone began behaving strangely. Messages deleted themselves, calls echoed with mechanical clicks. At night, footsteps paused outside my door and moved on. I told myself paranoia was contagious, that I'd inhaled too much of his fear, but still I backed up every file to 3 drives and hid them in separate locations. Fear sharpens the sense of logistics. Envelope arrived the following week. Inside, internal memos stamped for board use only. Most were trivial schedules. But one transcript caught my eye. A crisis management call dated the day after his fall. Voice A, contain the diary. Narrative must remain emotional, not systemic. Release statements by 5. Voice B, understood. The circle remains intact. Autumn, in handwriting, destroy after reading. I confronted the company's PR office. Their spokeswoman, immaculate and polite, said, there is no circle. Only grief magnified online. But her hand shook slightly when she passed me her card, blank on both sides. A joke. Perhaps. Or a warning. That night I spread the documents across my hotel bed like a deck of cursed cards. Names repeated. Hotel bookings overlapped. Financial transfers aligned with rehearsal schedules. At the center, a new shell corporation, Phoenix Consortium Limited, registered months before the incident. Days after, its listed director was a proxy who had also signed several talent contracts. Address led to post office box now empty. Every trace ended in deletion. By then, the mother had stopped answering calls. When she finally reached out, her voice was quieter but steadier. They think I only had the copy, she said. Gave me the real one. We met in a riverside park. She wore black gloves though the air was warm. From her bag she produced a single torn page, red ink fading into brown. If they silence me, remember the name Phoenix. They rise by what they burn, she said. He wanted you to see it. Soon after, the official investigation closed. No foul play. The statement read, death consistent with accidental fall. But the evidence inventory listed an item returned to next of kin, leather diary, returned to Mrs. U. She had never received it. Someone else had signed her name. The copy she held was missing 3 pages, exactly the ones describing the banquet. I wrote the article anyway, 30 pages of careful sourcing. Anonymized testimonies. and timelines cross-checked against financial data. My editor praised the writing, feared the liability, and killed the piece. Next morning my laptop failed. Backups unreadable. Whether coincidence or interference, I couldn't tell. I printed one hard copy, sealed it in an envelope, mailed it to an overseas outlet. The courier confirmed collection. The tracking number soon led to an error page. Weeks passed. No publication. No leak. The story dissolved into rumor again, followed by newer scandals. Yet in obscure corners of the internet, fans posted fragments, screenshots of diary lines that no one should have had. Look at the hands, one post read. Another replied, "The circle is watching." Each was deleted within hours. But the pattern persisted, like breath fog in glass. Night, as I sat revising my notes, encrypted message arrived: "You are not wrong. The circle has many shapes." Attached was a photograph of an empty stage. In the foreground, a single chair. On it, relay open to the final page. Beneath Yu Menglong's last words, someone had written in fresh blue ink, "The show goes on." The file disappeared after I closed it. The image stayed in my mind. I realized then that the circle didn't need secrecy, it thrived on disbelief. To expose it would be to perform for it. Months later I returned to apartment 1703. The landlord had repainted, the wardrobe was gone. Only a pale outline on the floorboards, the ghost of a hiding place. Through the open window the city glittered, unrepentant. I stood in that room and listened to the silence that had begun it all. Somewhere below, the machinery of fame kept turning. Where within it, echo of a voice still whispered from a diary no one was meant to find. I wrote one final version of the story, stripped of names, disguised as fiction, and published it in a small literary journal abroad. Readers called it haunting, implausible, poetic to be true. But a few sent private messages with a single phrase, "We heard him." A postcard arrived months later with no return address, a mountain sunrise, a sky without wires. On the back, in the mother's uneven English, "He is free now." They cannot script the sky. I keep that postcard above my desk. When the city hums with the electric noise of fame, I read her words and imagine him beyond contracts and cameras, beyond the circle's reach. And I think of his final line, the one written not in red or blue but in visible ink that reveals itself only under pressure. Some cries are not meant to be answered, they are meant to be heard.